1000. Got a full switchboard. I'll get to your calls shortly, but let's do this first.
The Mark Dolan Show on Talk Radio. The political panel.
Today, in the company of Miatta Fahnbulleh from the New Economics Foundation and Emma Webb, who is a broadcaster and commentator. Welcome to the show. Let me bring you both up to speed on what's happening in Jersey. A protest over post-Brexit rights by French fishermen at Jersey's main port has ended following talks that aimed to resolve the row. Approximately 60 boats protested at St Helier, and 2 Royal Navy ships and 2 French vessels were sent to the area. Now, the latest we have, what we're hearing at Talk Radio, is that French fishermen say that their rights are unfairly restricted by licences issued under the Channel Islands' new system. But Jersey's External Relations Minister, Ian Gorst, has said discussions were positive. And we are hearing now that the French fishermen have left Jersey after their protest. So, Emma, not a good look from the French, threatening to cut supplies of electricity to Jersey.
It certainly isn't. It's very heavy-handed of them. And it shows that the European Union, and particularly the French, seem to have got used to the previous state of affairs where they just had unlimited access to our fishing waters and seem to think that they have some right to that. Obviously, there are some of the fishermen who have received these licenses, but the idea that you can simply blackmail a country with threats of cutting off the electricity, however unrealistic the prospect of that might be, is just absolutely mad. So it's obviously good news that the talks have been successful, but very heavy-handed from the French fishermen. Obviously, it's important for us to listen to them because they're our neighbours, but as you say, pretty bad look for them, I think.
Miatta, we might expect these sorts of actions from a sort of despotic regime, perhaps Vladimir Putin or President Xi, not from Emmanuel Macron, a supposed ally.
Well, look, I think it was a bit of an overreaction from the French, but I think, let's not move away from the fundamentals. The fundamentals are, as with so much with the kind of Brexit deal, some headline terms were agreed. The detail has yet to be bottomed down, which means partners have a different interpretation of what has been agreed. And the absolute priority now is to get into the details, to get into the weeds and to iron that out. In the end, for me, we have a world in which we have some genuine enemies, genuine threats. We do not need to be making enemies of our allies and our friends. So we kind of need
to... Well, we're not the ones doing it, are we? I don't want to invoke...
It doesn't help anyone else.
I don't want to invoke Basil Fawlty, but we didn't start it. This is French fishermen who have appeared on the shores of Jersey. They've ignored the rules around various documentations that they have to provide to demonstrate that they have previously fished in those waters. They didn't have the paperwork. Tough luck.
Well, there are always two sides to every story. From their perspective, they will say the terms of the licensing agreement is not what we believed that we signed up to. A whole set of conditions have been put in place that we never thought would be put in place. That is obviously having an impact on our livelihoods. And, with everything, there is a grey where, both sides are right and both sides are wrong. Like, none of that matters. In the end of the day, France are our partners, they're our allies. We've got a trading relationship. Get around the table, sort out the detail, because until we sort out the detail over and over again, we're going to have these issues. And the big problem for me is there isn't trust. There isn't trust there, which means that everyone overreacts. That is a problem when we're talking about our allies.
I wouldn't trust anybody that threatened to cut the electricity supply to my house, Emma. With friends like France, who needs enemies?
Well, I do think it's a good point that we do have worse enemies. You mentioned China already. I think that China pose a bit more of a risk to the international community than the French threatening to cut off electricity to Jersey, as wrong as that might be. But it is important not to overblow it. This isn't Agincourt round 2. But I think, as you say, it is still pretty serious, and this isn't something that we have instigated, obviously. There are aspects of this that need to be ironed out.
Can you imagine if it was a British foreign minister or a British prime minister that said that we would cut supplies to a French territory? Can you imagine the fallout politically?
I would be completely mad, and I don't think we could really imagine fishermen from the UK doing anything similar to France, threatening to blockade
Imagine if Boris
the port
Johnson
of Calais.
or imagine if any government figure said we're going to switch off the lights in Belgium.
It's a completely absurd threat from them, obviously. But I think one of the reasons why this story has captured so much attention is because it is the French, and we do have this sort of tussling relationship with them historically. And so I think that's the reason why this has sort of captured people's imaginations. But it is important not to escalate it. We've successfully managed to de-escalate it so far. But I think we do need to take serious measures if they continue to make heavy-handed threats like that, just to put them in their place.
Miatta, a campaigning group, are very concerned about a scene from Snow White in which a handsome young prince kisses Snow White and brings her back to life. Have they got a point?
So, look, it was interesting reading this article because I hadn't really thought about Snow White in those terms. I read Snow White. It was a fairy tale. It was lovely. No one saw anything at all untoward with any of it. And, it was Prince Charming. Of course, he could kiss her. From a personal perspective, I don't take offense at it. It wouldn't have even crossed my mind that this was a thing. There are obviously people that do take offense to it. And, the point they make about, inferences about lack of consent, I think is a valid one. And my view is that if it offends a group of people enough, it's probably no harm to kind of respond and not have that particular aspect of Snow White on display.
And that's the most iconic scene in the movie. So would we cut it out of the film as well, do you think?
I'm sure creative people can think about different ways in which they can capture the sentiment without necessarily having that particular imagery.
Do you think that there should be a warning before the movie starts that there will be unconsensual behaviour within the film?
I think that would ruin it for many young people who love the fairy tale and would never think about it in those terms. I personally don't think it's appropriate. I get the point that's been made. And
Snow White, Miatta, apart from the fact that Snow White's fictional, she's dead. She's dead. So the seven dwarves, they didn't want to bury her because they were so fond of her. So they decided to put her in this rather fancy glass box. He's found out that the love of his life's popped her clogs. She's pushing up the daisies. She is an ex-princess. She is no more. And in order to say goodbye, he's planted a kiss on her, I'm afraid to say, pale dead body. And she's come back to life. So I think that the group that are offended by this have deliberately taken it out of context. She's not sleeping. To kiss a sleeping princess, I agree, is an unusual look and certainly suboptimal. But this is not the case. It's not the actual context. And this is what a lot of the woke brigade do, is deliberately gloss over some of the context in order to be outraged.
I would say that to sort of kiss a dead princess is also not a good look. I think if you take away the kind of the fairy tale, the magic of all of this stuff, and try to locate it in the real world, you not only ruin it for millions of children, but also it becomes very difficult and becomes very difficult to explain. My view is that fairy tales are fairy tales, and actually it's more important that we teach our kids about boundaries, about how to, interact or treat women, and do that explicitly rather than trying to do it implicitly through harmless tales.
Emma.
I agree with Miatta. It's an interesting, obviously raises moral issues about kissing dead bodies and necrophilia or something like that. But it's supposed to be true love's first kiss. These people manage to disenchant absolutely everything, and it's obviously been framed as part of these changes that they've been making in Disneyland in California to various different rides to try and make them a little bit more woke compliant. And it seems that the let's say sexual ethics is a part of the latest moral panic. And whereas previously it was trying to find anything problematic to do with race, now it's trying to find anything problematic to do with consent. But I agree with Miatta. It's very difficult for all three of us not to laugh at this. It's so silly.
But do you think that Disney should have removed that offending scene from this live fairground attraction at Disneyland?
No, I think that there aren't going to be enough people who would be offended by this. Most people would take a reasonable view on it, and see it as a fairy tale. It's supposed the context of it, as you say, perhaps unlike Sleeping Beauty, but the same would be the case there. It's supposed to be true love's first kiss. That's the context of it, and you can't take it out of the fairy tale and then try to, as one professor did from Osaka University in Japan, suggest that this is normalizing sexual assault.
Were Facebook and Instagram, Emma, right to continue their deplatforming of President Donald Trump?
Not at all. I don't think they should have suspended him in the first place. I think it was a panicked decision from them in the first instance, following what happened at Capitol Hill. And also, we have to remember that he was actually the impeachment. He was acquitted of the impeachment for inciting the mob to descend on Capitol Hill, and it's quite a strange state of affairs for the two companies that really have the monopoly on social media. Social media is essentially the public square today, particularly after everybody's been in lockdown for a year. It's quite a strange state of affairs for them to be completely cancelling from all of their platforms the former president of the United States of America, someone whose views should be heard and must be heard, particularly given the fact that when you look at the alternative platform, obviously the argument is that private companies should be allowed to do whatever they like, but the argument on the other side of that is that companies like Parler, that would provide the alternative, were essentially assassinated by their competition and taken down entirely. And so even the alternative platforms aren't available. And so what really has happened is an attempt to silence the former president of the United States, which is an unacceptable state of affairs.
Miatta, what do you think about this ban?
So I think the ban was, I disagree with Emma. I think the ban was the right thing to do. I think there is a big question about how social media companies better regulate the content on their platforms. And I don't think they're doing enough. But I think in particular, when you've got high profile figures that carry public weight, that carry public opinion, if they are saying things that are dangerous, that incite violence, that have big consequences, I think it's absolutely right that action should be taken. I think it's strange that we don't have a regulatory mechanism to do that, but fine. I think it was right for the companies to take the action that they did.
And do you think, though, there is a danger of making Donald Trump a digital martyr, Miatta, and actually playing into his narrative that there is a one-sided media that's out to sort of crush his worldview?
I mean, that will be the argument that he makes. And, you know, he's launched his website, so there will be other outlets. You know, but my view is that in the end, the key thing, and to be fair, I think the oversight committee and the points that they were making to Facebook, I think actually resonates quite a lot with me, which is they need clear rules so that it doesn't look like they're acting disproportionately to one individual who they might just not like. So they need transparency around the process and what leads to sanction and what these sanctions look like. But I think it's absolutely right that they should have sanctions. And I think it's probably absolutely right that sanctions were applied to Donald Trump. It's just a shame that they didn't have a framework by which to apply in a way that feels consistent. But they now need to go back and put that in place.
Well, it feels like a kangaroo court, doesn't it? I mean, you've got the actual group that are overlooking the process by which this decision was made, saying, well, you're going to have to justify making this an unending ban. Perhaps they could have made a statement and deplatformed him for a period of time, but let him get back on there, because to deplatform him is an insult to the many tens of millions of people, over 70 million people, that voted for Donald Trump just a few months ago.
Yeah, but I also think there's personal responsibility in this. You know, he said some incendiary things that he probably, looking back, shouldn't have said, and he probably thinks he shouldn't have said, given the kind of where it ended and landed him. And so I think there is some personal responsibility. And quite frankly, we need personal responsibility for all interaction on social media. People get away with saying things and doing things that in just normal life they would not do if they were meeting someone face to face. And I think we just need higher standards. But what we do need is a fair, transparent way by which those standards are upheld. And I think that's where the social media outlets have fallen short.
What's going to happen, Emma, is that social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook are going to have to decide whether they are a publisher or just a platform. But if they de-platform individuals, then they are a publisher because a judgment has been made about the material.
They've become judge, jury and executioner. And I think going back to what Miatta just said there, that the point really here is that they're removing content and they're removing individuals who have posted content that isn't illegal. They're removing people who have said things that they believe are essentially legal but harmful, and that's the reason for taking them down. So Donald Trump hasn't been found to have said anything illegal, and that isn't the reason why he's been removed from the platform. He hasn't broken any laws in the United States, and I think that is the reason why it was wrong to remove him in the first place. But to give somebody a lifetime ban, and also that will affect, we expect it's going to affect people who post material from this new website, which is essentially a blog that Donald Trump has set up. Anybody posting that sort of material on Twitter or Facebook, what's going to happen to them when he's become the social media persona non grata? So I think this throws up all sorts of issues that really boil down to the problem that social media companies have when it comes to regulating content that is still perfectly legal. You could say those things offline and you wouldn't be breaking any laws.
We've also seen, haven't we, Miatta, individuals and broadcasters deplatformed on YouTube and Twitter for expressing concerns or questions about lockdowns during the coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, and look, for me, again, this comes back to we need to have some clear rules. Actually, partly
I don't think we need rules. I don't think that YouTube or Twitter can decide what the correct science is on handling a pandemic.
No, but they need a framework across the piece.
Why? Why do they need a framework? It's an open platform for some people to say that the strategies globally against coronavirus, some can say it was the right thing to do, others can say that lockdowns were a mistake. But at the moment, people criticising lockdowns have been censored and deplatformed, including, briefly, this radio station.
Well, I can't possibly imagine them censoring talk radio, but the bigger point for me is it all feels a bit arbitrary. And in the end, that's why I think we need a framework that everyone understands, and you need some standards. So if there is public harm and it's clear what the public harm is, then it makes sense to do it. But at the moment, there isn't really a framework.
I say scrap the framework. But, no framework. Let's just have free speech. But I want to thank both of you for a brilliant political panel. And thank you so much for being very disciplined, the both of you, not getting onto actual British politics. Of course, we can't do that today. My sincere thanks to the wonderful Miatta Fahnbulleh from the New Economics Foundation and Emma Webb, broadcaster and journalist.